Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, but before that, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? I moved to my dad's when I was 10, and I didn't know anyone in the area except for the family my dad was friends with. A single mom with 3 kids. Luckily, there was a girl, a couple of years older than me. She was 12 at the time I met her. We got to know each other a little over a couple of years. We weren't close. We ended up having the same friend. One night, my friend Rob was hanging out with her and her younger brother. They happened to be in the house alone because their mom was at work. Her mother had been helping a lady through her job and got to know her fairly well. It turns out this lady had a sister who had been in a mental institution and was recently let out. The night Rob was hanging out with my friend, got a knock on the door. My friend thought it was just their mom, since she knocks a certain way when coming in, so she answered it without thinking. Rob wasn't supposed to be there, so he took off through the window to his house down the road, never thinking twice about it. It wasn't her mom. It was the sister of the lady her mom was helping, and she had figured out from talking to her sister where their family lived and her mom's work schedule. She came into the house. This is where I don't know the details, and I'm glad I don't. My friend's younger brother got away to the neighbor's house to call the police. Delaney brutally murdered my friend a week before Christmas, decapitating her and leaving her body naked in a bathtub. She even hit her head. They had to search through the presents, and I don't know where they found it, but they did. I wasn't allowed to go to her funeral. It happened to my wife's grandmother about 15 years ago, while we were still dating. Her husband had passed away about a year earlier, but she had been going down to the library and volunteering. It was a way to stay active, social, and keep herself busy. This happened during the winter, so by the time she was walking back home, it was starting to get dark. The library closed at 5, but there were some extra tasks to finish before everyone could leave. On this particular night, she declined a ride from another volunteer because she wanted to stay in shape. Her house was about a mile away, and the path led through some lightly wooded areas in South Texas. As she was walking home, about halfway through her journey, she noticed someone behind her. He was walking in the same direction and slowly gaining on her. At first, it didn't seem too concerning. She was older and not as fast. Something about him felt vaguely sinister. They kept walking, and pretty soon, he was right behind her. Then, he fell into step, staying close behind her. Now, she knew something was wrong. She was almost home. She could see the top of her driveway coming up, and she had left the lights on to make it seem like someone was home when she arrived. She only needed to make it another 150 yards, then 100. The entire time, she said she could feel his breath on her neck. At about 50 yards away from her house, it happened. She felt a strong hand on her shoulder. "Okay, lady, don't turn around. Hand over your purse or I'll cut you," the man growled. She paused for a moment, then took one big step forward. She turned and shot the man in the neck with a .38 revolver she kept in her purse. The man spent the next 5 years in a prison hospital before he eventually died from complication. My wife's grandmother passed away last year, but even up until her final days, she lamented that she had pulled the trigger too soon. When I was young, I'd say about 8 to 11 years old, my sister, who is 7 years older, would babysit me when my parents were out. At the time, she smoked a lot, and of course my parents made her smoke outside. Naturally, I'd follow her outside, play around, annoy her and such. One day, my sister noticed a car at the end of the driveway, just sitting there in the road. It was a white SUV with a bike rack on top, and it had the most tinted windows I'd ever seen. You couldn't see inside from the side at all. The car sat there until she went back inside, then it would drive to the end of the road and park at the church parking lot, just waiting. When she'd come back out for another smoke, car would return. It was odd. But my sister, being the brave person she is, just kind of ignored it. That is, until the next day, when my parents were out again and the SUV showed up once more. This time, it sat at the end of the driveway and watched. I don't know exactly what the driver was doing, but I could tell he was watching my sister. I know because when I didn't go outside with her, I'd watch from the front window, and the car would just sit there, staring at her. She eventually told my father, who was a sheriff's deputy at the time, called the police and made a complaint. They came, looked around. The SUV was nowhere to be found. Months went by with no sighting. Then, one day, about 9 months after this all started, and 4 months since the last sighting, came back. The SUV began showing up regularly. One day, my sister was outside, smoking like usual, and sure enough, the SUV appeared again. We were alone, as we usually were, and this time, my sister decided she had had enough. She told me to stay in the carport while she went to confront whoever was in the SUV. She started walking down the driveway, but halfway there, she suddenly stopped. Later, she told us, I felt a terror like I'd never felt, like I knew if I went any further, I was dead. He was paralyzed with fear and quickly turned around, heading back inside. A few days later, our family car was in the shop for repairs, so we were all stuck at home for the night. My parents were home this time. My sister went outside to smoke, and as usual, I followed her. And then, like clockwork, SUV appeared again. My sister immediately told me to run inside and tell our father. I did just that. My dad grabbed his gun and briskly walked down the driveway, gun in hand, though not pointed at the SUV. The moment the driver saw my dad approaching, the SUV floored it and peeled out onto the nearby highway. Being a cop, my dad noted the year, model, and some distinguishing features of the SUV. The scariest part? The license plate was covered in duct tape. We never saw that SUV. I was just 4 or 5 years old when my parents had just separated. My mom was living in a 2-bedroom apartment. I had my own room, but I preferred to sleep in her bed whenever I was staying with her. Our 2 bedrooms were at the end of the hallway, directly across from each other. Our apartment was on the first floor, and I remember it being the middle of summer with the window in my mom's room open, directly behind the bed above the headboard. One night, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw that our cat was sitting in the door frame of my mom's room. Her door was open, so you could partially see into my bedroom. This was strange because our cat was usually always in bed with us. As I watched, the cat walked into my bedroom and meowed. I turned to face my mom and woke her up. In the 3 or 4 seconds it took me to wake her and ask what was wrong, we both looked back at the door frame and saw a man standing by my open door, making his way out of the bedroom. I still don't know how she managed to do it so quickly, but my mother picked me up and threw me out of the screen window. She quickly followed, and we started screaming for help. Someone called 911, and the police came, but they didn't find any signs of forced entry, only that our front door was unlocked, leading them to believe that the man must have exited that way. The strange thing was that my mom swore up and down that she had locked the door that night with the deadbolt and chain lock. About a week later, while cleaning the kitchen, she opened the water heater closet and found a notebook with names and drawings, as well as a pair of gloves and some gum wrap. Police were called again, but all they could do was speculate. The man had been in our house and hid until we were asleep. This happened to a friend of mine. She told me about it about a year ago. We'll call her Minji. Minji is in her early 20s and works as an English tutor in South Korea. One evening a few years ago, she was tutoring a high school boy. They were studying pretty late, and the buses had stopped running. Being a long way from his house, the boy asked if he could crash on her floor overnight and catch the first bus in the morning. Minji was very reluctant because inviting a teenage male student to stay the night didn't seem like a great idea. But he was begging her, and eventually she relented. They went back into her one-room apartment. She got into bed while he laid a blanket out on the floor. They both fell asleep. A few hours later, around 2 a.m., the boy woke Minji up. "I'm really hungry," he said. "Let's go get some food." Minji opened her eyes and looked up at him in disbelief. "Food? It's 2 a.m. Go back to bed." But the student insisted, "No, I'm so hungry. Let's eat something now." She told him there was some ramen in the kitchen that he could fix himself, but this didn't satisfy him. He didn't want ramen. There was a 24-hour place just down the road. "Let's go there," he said. After several minutes of persuasion, the boy got Minji to come with him to the restaurant. They left the apartment and headed out. As soon as they were on the street, the boy turned to Minji, said, "I'm not hungry. I woke up in the middle of the night and looked under your bed. There's a man sleeping there." They called the police and discovered that a homeless man had been living in Minji's apartment, sleeping under the bed for 2 months. Boy only saw him because he was lying on the floor, giving him a clear view under the bed. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was a 2-lane road through total nothingness, except for a passing through town called Amboy. Amboy is nearly abandoned and situated as low as Death Valley. I was driving alone in the afternoon and had just started ascending the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I drove north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I noticed some objects in the middle of the road. As I approached, I slowed down and saw a red Pontiac Fiero stopped sideways across both lanes. There was a suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and 2 bodies lying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stopped about 100 feet away, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Being a Marine, I reached under the seat, pulled out a 9mm pistol, and chambered around. Something felt very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged for an ambush. As I scanned the road, I noticed a line I could drive past. If I swerved to the right of the woman and behind the Fiero, I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it down, and followed the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies. I continued forward a couple of 100 feet and slowed down to catch my breath and let my heart calm down. When I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the 2 bodies had gotten up on their knees and about 20 people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and body. At that moment, my right foot slammed the gas pedal to the floor and didn't let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me if I had gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped closer to. Some friends and I were doing some night fishing on the James River. We were sitting along the shoreline with a nice fire going, accompanied by the usual idle talk and a few beers, when suddenly everyone stopped talking. A switch had been flipped off. We were all staring across the river, feeling as if something or someone was staring back at us. It was a very uneasy feeling. Some of the group tried to shake off with typical macho humor. Then, a blood-curdling sound erupted from the other shore that froze everyone in their track. The sound was unlike any other I had ever heard. It made every hair on my body vibrate and tingle. The only way I could describe it was that it sounded like a wild person with no language skills being gutted alive. No words, just this high-pitched, blood-curdling scream. Nobody moved or said a word. We all just sat there, fixed in our stare. Then, just as suddenly, a second scream was let loose with even more force than the first. By this time, several of us were sprinting to our trucks, parked a few yards away to retrieve various firearms. When we got back, we sat there quietly with our eyes fixed on the opposite shore, watching the light from our fire reflecting off the rocks. We sat there, waiting for another scream or something to move on the other side of the river. Finally, third scream came. Just as suddenly, but this time it was on our side of the river, coming from the bushes about a yard away. We all hightailed it out of there, leaving most of our stuff behind. When we got to our trucks, we heard the scream one more time, just beyond the tree line. We all floored it, getting the hell away from there, and never found out what was making the sounds. It was a Friday night, and my friend was picking me up from my house. I was in a hurry since we were running late for the hockey game in the city. Throughout the car ride, we were having such a good time that I hadn't even noticed that I didn't have my phone. I searched the car seat and the floor, but it wasn't in the car. I was sure that I had just forgotten it during the hockey. Couldn't stop worrying that maybe I had dropped my phone somewhere. So I borrowed my friend's phone and ran to the bathroom. I dialed my number, hoping someone at my house would pick up. It took 3 rings before somebody answered. They remained silent on the other end. I yelled into the phone that I was just checking if I'd left my phone at home. There was no response. I assumed it was my little brother just messing with me, so I hung up. I got home late that night, find that my parents were at home. I went inside and called them to see where they were. They told me that they had gone out to eat and see a concert at the park with my little brother. They said they left soon after I had left for the game, and should be home in about half an hour. So I hung up and proceeded to look for my cell phone. Then I realized, how could someone from my family have picked up my phone if they hadn't been home? Felt a pang of fear as it swept over me. It was at that moment that I heard the back door to my house open and close. I immediately bolted out the front door to the neighbors, called the police. Apparently, the back door had been left open, and someone had simply walked into our house. Nothing was stolen, but the scariest thing was the thought we could have fallen asleep with a stranger in the house. A while back, a family moved in next door to mine. They had a son who was just twisted. He was obsessed with slasher movies and always wanted to discuss graphic things from my time serving in Vietnam, topics no normal person would want to hear. He also loved tormenting stray animals. This guy was a whack job. At the time, he was 19, and my daughter was 7. Despite their age difference, he always wanted to talk to her. He'd strike up conversations with her when she walked home from school, and talk over the fence while she was playing in the backyard. What really set me off was when he called our house looking to speak with her. That was it. I went over to his place and flipped out, and his parents told him to stay the hell away from my daughter. They also warned me not to see him near her again. That's when things got weird. My daughter has always been a bit imaginative and paranoid. She'd think there were monsters under her bed and such. So when she told me there was something living in her closet and that she was too scared to get up and tell us at night, but it wasn't there during the daytime, we brushed it off as just her imagination. A few weeks later, one night my wife and daughter were staying at my mother's for a girls' night, so I turned on the HBO box and watched some movies, eventually falling asleep downstairs. At around 2 a.m., I got a call from my neighbor with the creepy son. He said something like, "We saw that you were up, so we called. Our son is missing." I went by his room to use the bathroom, and his door was open, which is unusual. There was no sign of him. We need help looking for him. phone call woke me up, even though I hadn't been up. I asked why they thought I was awake. He said, "Oh, he saw you walking around upstairs, and the light is on." My blood ran cold. I'd been passed out on the couch, and I knew no one had turned any lights on. I hung up, ran outside to my truck to grab my shotgun, and noticed the sheriff pulling up to my neighbor's house. At that point, I raced over and told them there was someone in my house. I could see that the lights in my daughter's room were on and saw a silhouette pacing back and forth. When the deputies went in, they found my neighbor hiding in my daughter's room, waiting with a setup in her closet. He admitted that he liked to watch her sleep in the moonlight. One day, while doing my laundry, one of the lights blew out in my basement. My basement is set up so that the laundry room is separated from the other side of the basement by a wall and a door. To get upstairs, you have to exit the laundry room and go through the other part of the basement. So when the light blew out, it was in the other part of the basement, not the laundry room. Since it was the only light on that side, it was pretty dark. I finished the laundry I had to do, dreading the walk through the dark basement. I exited the laundry room, got halfway through the basement, and suddenly heard a loud cackle. Imagine the sound people make when they imitate a witch. Now, make it sound like the witch had been smoking for 50 years, making her voice deeper and hoarser. That's what I heard, clear as day right behind me. Didn't hesitate to bolt for the stairs. I waited until my father got home to change the bulb. I haven't heard that cackle since, and I have not told a single person in the house about it.